you reached a rather large audience with your Obama Hope image, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your reflections on that experience.
Sure. You probably all saw some of the images on the screen of the anti-Iraq war, anti-Bush posters that I did. I felt like after Bush was elected in 2000 that prior to 2000, I did some works that had a political or social point of view, but they usually weren't about things happening in the moment. They were about general ideas. But when Bush was elected and then after 9/11, when he said things like, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists," I found that to be terrifying because when you push people to feel afraid that if they speak out, they'll be seen as un-American, and they censor themselves, then that means that only voices from a certain point of view are acceptable, and it narrows the discourse. I believe it was Albert Maysles who said that tyranny is the deliberate eradication of nuance. And I wanted to be more outspoken. People said, "Oh, now after 9/11, where everyone's very sensitive about everything, don't you think you should tone your stuff down?" I said, "No, now is when I need to be that much more courageous about my point of view because so many people are censoring themselves." So if I was going to make all that work that was against the Iraq War and against the Patriot Act and people giving up certain civil liberties to be safer,
Thunderous applause.
Yeah. I made all that work, and it was somewhat therapeutic, but at the same time, it was only criticizing, not offering an alternative. And so when I heard Obama's speech at the DNC in 2004, I felt like he was a compelling orator. And then when I found out he was running for president and he had opposed the Iraq war when it was not a strong position politically, which is why Hillary Clinton didn't oppose it. She's very calculating. That's a career politician. They're shrewd. Which way is the wind blowing? I admired Obama for not going that route. Since then, he's gone that route quite a bit. But when he talked about decreasing the influence of lobbyists in Washington, pushing for green energy and green technology to be subsidized, universal health care, strengthening the position of unions, all of the things he talked about were, to me, the antithesis of the guy I'd been criticizing. So if I were too afraid to support him because I thought it would tarnish my brand as a rebel, then I'd just be an asshole. So, because being scared to step out of your comfort zone, it's just not the way to evolve anything. And so I decided that I needed to be out front about my support of Obama, and in the same way I'd been out front about my criticism of Bush. And I didn't think that my poster would make a bit of difference. I thought maybe to my 500 people that pay attention to what I do, but I did know that most of my work would be dismissed as un-American or radical, and that I needed to try to find a balance between making something that seemed sincerely supportive, but a little bit cooler than the usual political poster. Within that is seriously like a hair width of room to maneuver. But I would try to make that happen, and it just succeeded far beyond anything I ever could have imagined. But I am really proud of it as a piece of grassroots activism, because I first made 750 posters, and I sold 350 on my website, and used the other ones to put up on the street. And then I knew that once I sold the 350, I could use that money to print offset lithographs, which are very inexpensive, that then I could distribute. So I used that money to print another 10,000. And then people commissioned artwork. I made a free download for my website. And next thing you know, just by reinvesting, I'd printed 300,000 posters and 500,000 stickers, which were all given away. And you know, it became what it became. And when you look at politics, and the influence in politics is, there's the parties themselves and their hierarchy, and then a few very, very wealthy people and corporations who can make big donations, and everyone else is pretty much a spectator. And I felt that to see a piece of grassroots activism made by someone who didn't have a lot of power or money meant that maybe people who normally feel like they're shut out of the conversation would be more vocal the next time. And that is something that I'm proud of if that could happen. Regardless of which side of the aisle you're on politically, the idea of more voices, more participation, that makes democracy function better. And there are a lot of impediments to democracy functioning properly that we're still dealing with, but that was something that I hope would make people feel less apathetic.
Great answer.